Christianity and the establishment of colonialism in East Africa. The establishment of colonialism in East Africa took place in the 19th century and in the early years of the 20th century. When we say 19th century, that is way back in 1800. And then the early 1900 is what we call the 20th century. So as we talk now, we are in the 21st century. Okay, so we go. Christianity, when we talk about Christianity, we are referring to the Christian missionaries. The very first people who came here were called the explorers. Some explorers were missionaries. For example, you remember Ludwig Krapf, you remember Rebman, you remember David Livingstone, plus some other explorers who were missionaries, and we are not knowing them, or they are not known, or we are missing them out. So now the explorers who were here in East Africa did a lot of work in marketing East Africa to the outside countries. For example, in 1875, H.M. Stanley, he was an explorer, met Kabaka Mutesa I in Uganda here at his palace in Lubaga Mengo. He came here and convinced the Kabaka. The Kabaka ended up inviting the missionaries, the Christian teachers, to come here. So we have two groups of people. We have the explorers who came here. Explorers comes from the word explorer. Explorer comes from the word explorer. Exploration, to explore, is to discover. So when those people came here, they spent some good time here. Some of them learned local languages, including Kiswahili, including Luganda. So these explorers appreciated, why I'm saying that they spent some good time here is because there was no transport means. So someone walked. Day 1, day 2, 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5, 6. So whatever they were doing, they had the fax machines. By that time, fax machines were there. Then others they used the fax machines to report whatever they wanted to report. A fax machine, you can be here and report. Others did not report. Others were eaten by wild animals. They did not survive. And no one knew their whereabouts. Now, those that survived did a lot of work. They reported everything they saw in East Africa here, back to their mother nations. For example, H.M. Stanley reported. Dr. David Livingstone reported. Actually, Dr. David Livingstone did a lot of work in reporting about East Africa, especially on slave trade. He wrote very many articles in the newspapers of London, the New Times of London, in the USA. He preached about slave trade, which attracted very many people in Europe, and they came to understand that indeed very many people were suffering because of slave trading that was booming in the late 18th century. Okay, so now the first group of Europeans that came to East Africa to spread Christianity was the group of the Portuguese. They had very big crosses. Even on their boats, they had the big crosses. But they did not do a lot of work with the spreading of Christianity until their subjugation by the Arabs. So the missionaries landed here in 1840. You remember Rebman, Ludwig Krapf, Rebman, during that time. So those people that came here opened the way for the influx of very many missionaries in East Africa. the Church Missionary Society, those very many groups that came to East Africa and preached the good news. So even those missionaries that came during that time also helped in reporting back. But they did a lot of work. They spent a lot of time here learning. Now, those first missionaries, when they realized that there were problems like diseases, they reported back. And the home countries or missionary groups mobilized resources to build hospitals to treat those diseases. When they came here and appreciated that Africans are not reading and writing, there are no schools, what did they do? They wrote reports back to Europe. European statesmen, concerned persons mobilized resources to come here and establish schools. When they realized that there are no churches here in East Africa, they reported. That was the role of the explorers. Some explorers were missionaries. Now the explorers, everything was reported. Whatever they saw here, they reported back to their home countries. And either statesmen, European statesmen, or Christian teachers themselves in Europe, Christian groups mobilized resources, came to Africa, built churches, built schools, built roads, built hospitals, and rehabilitation centers. I have said that the missionaries came during the time when Africa, especially East Africa, was suffering a lot as a result of slave trading. Your teacher taught you about slavery. Very many people suffered because of slavery. Very many people's property was destroyed. Very many people ran away from their homes simply because of what? Of slave trade. Very many children went away. Very many children became orphans and so on. So now, missionaries used that opportunity to establish rehabilitation centers where they kept Africans. Now to keep them there, they used it as an opportunity to preach the good news to them because they were desperate. They had nowhere to go. Okay, now the issue today that we are looking at is how did the spreading of the gospel, how did Christianity help in the establishment of colonialism? The early missionaries that came here were purely humanitarian. They were towards helping to solve the need, the pressing, the problems in Africa. That's why they came. But later, they ended up becoming what? Colonialists. Because they realized that they would not survive, they would not help to solve all those problems without the help of their home governments. Some home governments, because they read the reports that reported about the mineral resources which we had here, they resolved to come to East Africa, colonize and exploit those resources. So now we go. The role played by the missionaries in the colonization of East Africa. The very first one. Missionaries preached the good news. We all know that. And when they ask you why did the missionaries come, you will say that they came here to preach the good news. They came here to spread Christianity. Yes, in the process of spreading Christianity, they softened the hearts and the minds of the Africans. Through their Christian teachings, they preached love for one another. They preached forgiveness for one another. They preached obedience over their masters. Now, you as a Christian, a converted Christian, how could you turn against the colonialists who had become their masters, who had become their enemies? They say love one another. So that preaching from after a longer period of time. Now you imagine the missionaries came here in 1840, isn't it? East Africa was colonized up to 1900. Lukumi muruenda kuva mu 1800 Christianity weyaja mu East Africa. Waitawo emyaka emiranga 10 mu. 100 now 100 abamu bafa bazaala ne bafa kiba kitegeeza very many people's mindset had been changed to accept everything that was European. They preached love for one another. Would you fight against your enemy? Jesus says forgive one another very many times. Obey your masters. Do not kill. How would you turn against the whites? They said do not kill. They said do not steal. How would you steal the property of the whites? You're getting the game. They are the same people preaching it. So like that, they say, so their preaching ended up making the Africans very humble to the extent of accepting colonialism. They said love one another. In the process of loving one another, they could not turn against the whites, the colonialists. In the process, they accepted colonialists. Even today, we are still colonialized. Number 2, missionaries worked as explorers. I told you explorers discovered a lot of information in Africa here. So their discoveries, they wrote reports back to Europe. The European statesmen liked, appreciated whatever they read in those reports. At the end of the game, they resolved to come to East Africa, take over and then exploit everything that had been reported, especially mineral resources. They enjoyed very many things. Persons like Dr. David Livingstone reported the East African mineral wealth to the British government, which attracted the British to come to East Africa to take over East Africa and colonialize it. Period. They admired. It is like talking about your husband. You are busy with your friend. You talk about your husband, whatever good thing he does for you. You talk about it. The person you are talking about, you are telling, is developing feelings towards your husband. What will happen next? When you're watching wrestling, they say, don't try this at home. We go. Next point. Missionaries involved themselves in signing treaties. These treaties include the 1900 Buganda Agreement. The 1900 Buganda Agreement, the missionaries acted as mediators in Gabebali Makati. Some of them had learned local languages like Kiswahili. So they would interpret in Kiswahili, then those speaking Kiswahili would interpret to the king, to the regents. You remember the regents that represented Daudi Chwa. Then they would speak in English. They were mediators to the colonialists between the Baganda, the traditionalists, and the what? And the whites, or the colonialists, and between the Baganda and the colonialists. They mediated the signing of treaties. In the 1900 Buganda Agreement, Buganda ended up losing power, especially the king. And that's why we have the Mairo and Crown land, which are problems today. So, the signing of the Buganda Agreement, mediated by the whites, by the missionaries, which we say Christianity, helped a lot in cementing colonialism here. They were there to make sure that the regents sign on behalf of Daudi Chwa, accepting the agreement. In the agreement, they were benefiting. Until today, there is nothing that can be changed with the boundaries of Uganda, with the powers of the Kabaka. However much we shout, as long as UK is still there, United Kingdom or England is still there, there's nothing we can claim. They took very many things. The Kabaka lost a lot of powers, and we can never go back. So Uganda ended up losing its power to the British through that treaty. Another point. Missionaries financed the activities of the chartered companies. Chartered companies, There are two chartered companies that fully operated in East Africa. One is called the IBEACO, the Imperial British East African Company. This one operated in Kenya and Uganda. Then the GIECO, the German East African Company. This one is operated in Tanganyika. The GIECO was established by Karl Peters, a German representative or administrator. And then the IBEACO was established by William Mackinnon from England. These two companies were financed by the missionaries. For example, in 1991 and 92, the IBEACO ran bankrupt and it was going to go back to Europe. The CMS, because they could not be here alone, they financed IBEACO for the next 2 years. IBEACO stayed here. The staying here of IBEACO in East Africa strengthened the operations of the church missionary society, hence cementing their plans of colonializing East Africa, colonializing Uganda in particular. Another point, the missionaries directly involved themselves in the politics of the East African societies. For example, do you know that in 1893, rather 1893, the Church Missionary Society got involved in the overthrow of Kabaka Mwanga, which made Buganda to lose her independence to the British. And that's why in 1894, Buganda was declared a British protectorate. That's why Mwanga later was exiled to Seychelles Island. And later he died. So that's why in 1900, Buganda was under a new king who was very young, Daudi Chua. Another point, Christian missionaries directly worked with the chartered companies in the spreading of colonialism in East Africa. Chartered companies. For example, you remember F.D. Lugard. F.D. Lugard worked for the IBEACO, the IBEACO. Now the CMS, while in Uganda, ably cooperated with Captain Frederick Lugard of IBEACO to take over Buganda region. For example, in 1900, in 1890, during the religious wars which had started in 1888, F.D. Lugard was joined by the CMS to fight against. When I say CMS, that is Church Missionary Society. Protestant. Those are Protestants. The Protestants in Uganda here were fighting against the Catholics. Religious wars, the Tuita Wangereza wa Faransa wars. The white fathers who were the Catholics were fighting against the Protestants. Kubanga, they were all fighting for one man Buganda, or one husband Buganda. Abakatoliki bagamba, if the Protestants rule, we shall fight. Aba Protestant bagamba, if the Catholics rule, we shall fight. So that was the struggle. They enjoyed the struggle. So in 1990, when Lugard came in Uganda as a special administrator, Lugard joined the side of the Protestants. They fought badly, defeated Kabaka Mwanga, defeated also, you know, Kabaka Mwanga was a darling. Yali ayagala nnyo Abakatoliki. He was leaning. He did not accept Catholicism. He was leaning. Yali abaagala mukko. Kati bano kyekyo lwaki even yasalanga n'emisango sometimes in favor of the Protestants. What? So some Protestants thought that the Kabaka was in support of the Catholics. Kyekyo lwaki baalwana. That's why F.D. Lugard got his gun, actually gave 500 guns to the Protestants to fight against the Catholics. Catholics were defeated. Baba wangu le road town erukola kine rugwa. By 1894, the war had everything had ended, and Uganda was declared a British protectorate. But the Protestants, the CMS, worked with Captain F.D. Lugard of the Ibeco to take over Buganda. Missionaries established schools. That is another point. That education produced a number of African elites. Those elites acted as collaborators for the colonial administrators. For example, talk about Apollo Kagwa. Talk about Semeika Kunguru. Semeika Kunguru helped the missionary, the colonial administrators to spread colonialism in Busoga region. But all those people were taught by the whites. They were preparing them. So the missionary education raised very many African elites who later collaborated with the whites. Next, missionaries built roads and railway lines. Now, you must remember that these railway lines acted as means of transporting the colonialists from one place to another. It also transported the colonial troops and administrators in East Africa, within East Africa, and into East Africa. In the interior of East Africa. So, who constructed these roads first? The missionaries. However much missionaries got finances from their home governments, but missionaries were the ones that did so. Next, missionaries put up health centers. You know those ones, in form of dispensaries and hospitals in East Africa. These ones reduced the threat of diseases, and all the colonialists that had got scared of coming to East Africa ended up being attracted to coming to East Africa. So missionaries are given a credit that they were behind the colonialization of East Africa. Then we go. Missionaries introduced the cash crop agriculture, or the cash crop economy, by encouraging East Africans to grow cash crops. This one attracted very many Africans to love the missionaries, to love the whites. At the end of the game, they ended up attracting colonialism, because they didn't know that what the whites were doing would turn to be bad. So they ended up loving everything. Now, with these cash crops, for example, cotton, whenever they grew cotton, they sold the cotton to the whites. The whites gave them money. So this money, in return, would be paid as a tax, because later the colonial administrators charged them head tax. Omusolo gw'omutwe ogwo financed the activities of the colonial offices, the colonial administration in East Africa here. Another point, missionaries themselves engaged directly in wars which helped them to establish colonialism. We take examples of wars. The most important war were the religious wars in East Africa. They were Faransa, Wangereza. They directly participated in them. Talk about the missionaries were there during the 1888 to 1892 religious wars. They have already talked about that the CMS received guns from F.D. Lugard. Not so. Which guns were given to the Protestants to fight against the Catholics? Even Catholics got support from the mother countries of France and Germany to fight against the Protestants here in Uganda, after realizing that war would not end without colonial intervention. They brought guns and very many people died. Next, missionaries invited their home governments to come to East Africa to colonize the areas they had Christianized. All those areas where they had successfully Christianized turned into Christianity. They invited the colonial masters to come here and colonialize them. Take the example of Uganda. Immediately after Britain, after missionaries winning the heart of Kabaka Mwanga later accepted Christianity and was named Daniel. Daniel, that is a Protestant name. After 1 year, 1894, Kabaka Mutesa, rather Mwanga, Buganda was declared a British protectorate. It is only Kabaka Mutesa one who did neither convert to Protestantism or Catholicism. But Mwanga was forced to accept the name Basamulekere Danielo. So immediately after having the king converted to Christianity, they declared Uganda as a British protectorate. They invited the British to come very early to take over Uganda. Another point, the missionaries divided the East Africans along Christian denominations. Some people are Catholics, others are Protestants. Now these two groups could not unite to fight against a common enemy, colonialist. They could not fight him because they were not united. Who divided them? The missionaries. Next, missionaries reported, because they were here for some time, missionaries reported hostile and friendly communities of East Africa, which made the colonialists come well prepared to fight against colonial tribes, well prepared to meet those hospitable, welcoming communities like Uganda. You remember the missionaries, H.M. Stanley, and some others. They knew that Uganda was very hospitable. They knew that the Chikuyu are not easy people. So they came well prepared to attack or to give gifts. Missionaries made friendship with African leaders who easily accepted colonialism when they came to East Africa, hence leading to colonialism. For example, Kabaka Mutesa of Uganda welcomed the colonialists and gave them his chiefs, gave them protection, gave them land. Labettaka eriri emengo lye baagabira abakatuliki, genda ensambya lye baagabira abakatuliki, emengo baaligabira abaprotestant, ensambya abakatuliki, elubaga baaligabira abakatuliki era. Labettaka eryo lyonna baaliwa abasajja abo. Next, missionaries abolished slave trade, now slave trade was a problem to the Africans. So the fact that missionaries abolished slave trade through preaching against it, through establishing rehabilitation centers, through preaching the good news, through becoming parents to those Africans that had lost their parents, through establishing homes to accommodate them, because very many of them had lost their homes. You remember whenever they were attacking, looking for slaves, they would burn the houses. They gave food to the Africans. All of this made Africans to fall in love with the whites, because they could not know whether this white is a colonialist or a missionary. They fell in love with the colonialists. At the end of the game, they ended up falling in love with everything that was white. Hence the establishment of colonialism on East Africa. Now, I cannot finish everything, of course. So these were the roles played by the missionaries in the establishment of Christianity. So I cannot finish everything, just as I have said. So there are very many factors that led to that. Very many factors in which missionaries contributed to the colonialization of East Africa. So I want students who are listening to this audio to summarize for me the ways in which colonialism supported or aided Christianity in East Africa. In other words, the role of colonialism in the establishment of Christianity. Kiri kibadde Christianity in the establishment of colonialism. Wano tuli colonialism in the establishment of Christianity. Summarize for me and put on the page. I thank you for listening to me. Keep active.